Good afternoon. It is 2 p.m. and I will call the City Council workshop for February 2022-2023 to order. I'm presiding at the request of Mayor Severns. This will be both a physical and a virtual meeting. Some members of city staff and consultants are participating via teleconference. Guests that are included in the staff presentations will be excused from the Ring Central meeting at the conclusion of the agenda item as appropriate. Today's meeting may be viewed live on YouTube, Facebook, and then available for viewing after the meeting on channel 10 HD 1090. Public comment is not normally taken at workshop meetings, although council may allow or request public participation. First up, we have administration interlocal agreement with Port of COUPEVILLE for airport purchase and support. Go ahead, our City Administrator Blaine Oborn and Economic Development Coordinator Steve McCassam will present.
Okay, Steve did a lot of the behind the scenes here, but I'll take on the presentation here. And behind the scenes also participated, our council member Wiesner has been pretty active in support of the airport and been a partner and been part of the discussions with the Port of COUPEVILLE and the Island County and taking on a partnership and purchasing the airport and then revitalizing it. So just a little bit more background here. And next slide, please. It's kind of what I already talked about, the partnership here. I mentioned the county, but was also involved in it. So the Old Harbor Airport. And I think it's a good point here is the airport really isn't currently meeting the full potential, and we really think that public ownership would really help it do that. And it's for sale, and it is an important economic development asset in this community. Next slide, please. More background here. And I mentioned earlier that support was requested from the Port of COUPEVILLE. It's not actually in their boundaries, and I think for previous conversations we had, possibly expanding the port boundaries, that would be another discussion in the future, but certainly they're willing to take that on, and we appreciate that partnership with them in working with us, and I think it's beneficial for us to be a player in this and give some contribution there. Where the airport is in the next slide here. 3 parcels here. I think most people know it's really not that far from the city, 1.16 miles. Unfortunately, it's outside our urban growth area and outside our joint planning area, but we've already had discussions with the county of moving both those, and I'm hoping that part of our benefit of our participation is that it would encourage expansion in the south, where we have a lot of opportunity for development and economic development and housing. So separate areas, but certainly this is a key asset that's underutilized, and so with city support with the county and Island and the port, hopefully we can take this on. And then a little blow up here on the next slide here of a bigger picture of what the property is there on Monroe Landing there with the 3 parcels that make up, and there's some undeveloped area there that certainly can do hangars and other economic development opportunities there. Expansion of the runway, just a lot of opportunities there with the airport. So more specific about what we're kind of tentatively looking at here, giving you the contract, but it's still in draft format. We haven't really moved it forward to the port yet for input here, but we've kind of got a working document. So the concept here is to provide $200,000 in economic development support related to the airport, and it kind of has 2 terminates if they no longer pursue it. I wanted to put a fixed date on there, so hopefully they'll know before December 31st, 2024. And then if they do pursue purchase, then they can continue to draw from this $200,000 for it all the way through 2026. Of course, these numbers may change a little bit after further discussion, but before we go too further, I want to get council's input on it. So going on to your schedule here, I kind of talked, it's still being determined. There is another buyer that's potentially interested, but I really think it's the best interest that the airport be in public hands and a lot more access to funding and revitalizing it. And then we're just working on the interlocal agreement here that you have. So I guess I'm opening it up to any questions on last slide here that you have on, and before we bring this forward for official approval of the council for an interlocal agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Oborn. This time I will turn to council for question and comments. Council is reminded to address their comments to the chair, and for the sake of making it easier for me to keep track of who has spoken how many times, please wait until I give you the floor to speak. And Councilor Stuckey had his hand up first. Go ahead.
So help paint the picture for me a little bit. I'm hearing, its full potential. What's the vision? What does the full potential look like?
Well, Councilmember Wiesner probably can answer that better than I can, because I think he saw how it worked in the past there. So I'm putting you on this spot here, but Councilmember Wiesner, but I think you're probably the best one to answer this than me. So you want to take a shot at it?
Because for me, and coming from someone who hasn't been here as long as someone like yourself, all I remember of it is mostly dysfunctional. Link Air, $200 fares each way to Seattle. It may have been different, but I need someone to paint the picture for me. If you could help, I'd appreciate it, if that's okay.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I mean, there may be a little history, of what my involvement in this thing was. I think it started about 4 years ago, a conversation with Mr. Eisenberg, who at that time owned the airport. And the conversation went around to what the airport used to be, and how there had not been any investment in it, and he was just basically kind of letting it sit there. And then after that conversation, there was a conversation back in D.C. with some of our congressional leaders involving the airport and the importance of it. It's the only property on the island that's zoned for airport. So it either stays as an airport or it goes away, and there's probably no opportunity to ever bring something like it back. And so, it was stated to me back when I was in D.C., quite frankly, that, boy, it's a shame that wasn't in government hands, because there's a considerable amount of money for infrastructure investment, FAA investment. The state apparently even has funds apparently for government-owned airports through State Department of Transportation. And so that's when the idea was sparked. What it used to be was a working commuter airline system, Harbor Airlines, and they were on a code share with Alaska Airlines. And I don't imagine it would ever happen again, but back in the day, I think it was either $10 or $20 extra on top of your Alaska airfare, and you flew down on Harbor Air. And they were running 6 to 8 flights a day. And a lot of the military was using it also for transport up here. So that's what it was, and it did function well as that. They actually had security screening here, so you went directly into the SeaTac airport, so you didn't have to get security screened down at SeaTac. And I know that I used it as a commuter airline commuting back east for a couple of years, leaving every Friday and coming back every Monday. But I think really, the spark of the vision is the Skagit County Airport, the little airport that could. And if you would have visited Skagit County Airport, say 25 years ago, you would have seen an airport that looked very similar to the Oak Harbor Airport. Now, certainly This does not have the area that Skagit County Airport does, although it does have several large tracts of land around it that maybe 25, 30 years down the road could be incorporated. But, the Skagit County Airport has now become a, fairly major hub. Amazon's built a facility over there, Dry-Z Air. It's become an industrial driver. Seems that's what happens with airports, and it's an opportunity for the Port of COUPEVILLE. This isn't necessarily, Oak Harbor's huge opportunity. Oak Harbor, in my mind, and I think we're kind of taking an appropriate role as a small part of this. I mean, we have I think an economic interest in the viability of an airport operating just outside of our city, and we just see what kind of occurs around airports. It just seems to be kind of a natural draw for, that manufacturing and that type of development that we've kind of struggled with. And we've got areas on Goldie Road, of course, that Oak Harbor needs to be focused on filling in for the short term, but for the long term, I think having an airport, on our island, on the north end of our island, near our community, can be an economic driver. So what it could be, that's going to really be up to the Port of COUPEVILLE, but I think Oak Harbor taking a small part in driving this forward. The county is going to, are the folks who have stepped up and said they're going to be the main economic driver. I think we all get the reason that Oak Harbor or the county is not running this, right? We're not in the airport business. Ports are in the airport business. That's what ports do, and ports have the economic infrastructure in place. The Port of Skagit County has used the economic driver that the airport has given them to do development of infrastructure of commercial pads outside of the airport, and they go in and they create those commercial pads and then sell them for commercial development. So several of that's happened in the Mount Vernon and Burlington area. That's part of the what's in the ports, and the Port of COUPEVILLE happened to be in the mode right now where they are talking about taking on some economic projects outside of their district, which is again part of what ports do with the port money. They can invest in infrastructure and some of the things that we necessarily wouldn't invest in, and they have the financing there to do it. So long answer, but again, this has actually been in the works for about 4 years. So that's why there's such a long answer.
No, I appreciate. I guess just to have to wrap my mind. It's interesting you say Skagit, because I'm thinking I guess I could say I'm an average individual, middle class. I don't own a manufacturing, and I would never think of the Skagit Airport as anything that would be of use to me personally, other than maybe if I want to take private flying lessons. I mean, if I go on Google and I search up airfare, I'm not going to see Skagit, I don't think. And even for me, when it comes to Bellingham, it really only makes sense for a few destinations. Otherwise, if I'm flying to Texas, I can get a third of the fare by driving to Seattle. So I can imagine a fare from here is going to be even more than Bellingham would be. So I guess I just got to wrap my mind around economic development other than passenger commercial air travel. I mean, that sounds great. That would be help the most people, but I don't see it being the most economical. I mean, the only people that are going to be doing that are people that are pretty well to do. I mean, I refer to Link Air because that's all I know. But again, $200 each way to Seattle, I don't think the average person's spending that. That'll be some, but not many. With this $200,000, we have no control. I mean, we have a couple of stipulations, but we have no control of the airport, correct?
We don't want control.
No, I understand we don't want control. We don't want to manage it.
We want to be a partner on it, so that we're coming to the table. So my incentive there is by us putting up the $200,000, we're at the table. We're going to be involved in what they do. They're going to manage it, but it puts us as a partner here, and I think it's good for us to be involved in it. It's very close to the city, and certainly has a lot of potential on it, and I think we need to be a partner with it. So that's the benefit, the 200,000, you got to ask, what's the benefit? The benefit
Sure.
is we revitalize it, we help revitalize this area here. We're only providing part of the seed money required here, and we're working cooperatively with the county and with the port. So that's the real benefit there, and I think it'll drive economic development in that area there, and certainly that's a great potential area for us to potentially grow in opportunity in. So I think there's a lot of benefit. So your question is it's much more than the $200 fare, the
Sure.
potential fare in it. So I think it benefits everybody in the city, and so it's obviously, in my opinion, it's best interest that we be a participating partner in it, because we certainly can try to see if they can go it alone, but the COUPEVILLE doesn't have a lot of resources, and I think I'm just really ecstatic that they're interested in taking this on and realizing that they do it. And in Washington State, like was talked about earlier, is ports are the economic engine that kind of drive the airports, and they would work with their fellow ports and kind of taking that on, and it'll be a lot easier for them to manage it and to run it than it would be for the city to do it. But certainly the option is there. But we already have a marina that's kind of out of context here, so it just makes sense. So I'm thankful that they're willing to be a partner, and I think it's in our best interest to support them.
Yeah, a lot of it does make sense, especially if the county's involved, which they're going to have to be. And at this point, this contract for the $200K, I mean, if this ends up being a money pit, that's not on us, correct?
We're not the owner.
Correct. So I mean, that's it.
So we're trying to give them seed money where between the partnership of the city and the county, that they feel like they have enough seed money to really take on this challenge here. But interesting enough, there's a lot of grant opportunity. Just attended this morning here the IRTPO, Island Regional Transportation Organization, and they had a representative from the Washington State Department of Transportation that has an aviation division, and they had the interim director there, and there's quite a lot of grant there. So they're viewed as economic development engines, and there's quite a lot of grant money available there. And then we need multiple accesses. We only have one road access here, so that's the county looked at other things from emergencies, a lot more than just economic development, and taking them on with emergencies and multiple accesses and gateways to the city. And this obviously is a gateway here. So it was talked about how Department of Transportation, they take on the the water, the air, and the roads is more land is more the traditional, but they're all forms of transportation.
And I'm not wholly against it. I mean, a lot of it makes sense. Moving lines certainly would be nice. I guess the only thing that would be helpful for me, and perhaps the public, and Councilman Weiser touched on it, it's a little more articulation. Drives economic development. To the average person, what exactly could that look like? Would it mean, wow, we have a way for people to bring industrial items here, and a manufacturing plant could go somewhere near to use something that's more than drives economic development? To me, it's kind of vague, and it'd be nice to at least get some examples that are a little more detail orientated.
But
not that it's for sure that would happen, but
I think Councilmember Wiesner went to a real life example of a airport next to us. So
yes,
that is a real life example of how you see the economic development catalyst of them. So
And that's a good
it's
start,
challenging.
yeah.
I appreciate
Yeah.
your trying to get it down to the person, but we'll do our best to kind of give examples of that and so that people know why we're doing what we're doing.
yeah, and that's all I'm asking, because when most people think revitalizing the airport, I think most people are thinking travel for average citizens, which doesn't sound like, why that would be nice. It doesn't sound like that's the main thrust of this. And so giving examples like Councilman Weiser had, a few more. So for someone like me, if someone asks, why are we doing that? I need some touch points. Well, because it could do this, this, and this, not just economic development. I mean, if that makes sense, just some specific examples of what that potential could look like. I mean, I look at Skagit, which I've heard referenced a couple times. And again, as the average person, I don't know much about air travel, and I just think of Skagit as a place you could take some flying lessons and private pilots can fly into. I'm sure it does other things, but being able to articulate those so I can help articulate those, what those other things specifically could look like would be helpful. So that's all I have.
Yeah.
Counselor Hoffmeyer.
Yeah, I think I first started talking with Councilor Wiesner about this a couple years ago, and have really enjoyed hearing some of his vision. Since then, I've spoken with some members of the port, spoken with our county commissioners, and one of the things that most excites me about this is the synergy and the improved relations within our own local governments that you could have, and sure, moving that JPA would be huge if we could get that on the table finally. When you look at something like what the Skagit Regional Airport is, it is quite the economic driver up there. With a lot of industry in there that equals jobs, and even some restaurants to go eat at. And my gosh, I don't know how many times I've had to go to FedEx there and pick up stuff that for whatever reason hasn't been delivered. But there's a ton of economic value there for sure. And whether it's talking with our Congressman Larson, or whether talking with Rep Paul or Rep Shavers, I mean, for whatever reason, the word light bulb or the word airport really seems to turn a light bulb on in their head, and every one of them thinks of these untouched pots of money of, hey, we don't have money for this, and this that you're asking for, but we got all the money in the world you're asking for when it comes to this. So I really, I'm excited, and if $200,000 on the city's part is what it takes to get this ball rolling, it is something that could mean much more locally for sure. So that's where I'm at. Thanks.
Thank you. So who is all at the table? It's the county, city of Oak Harbor, and the Port of Coupeville?
Yes.
Okay. And what is the expected total investment that's going to be made amongst those parties? What are they expecting this is going to cost them?
We're still developing the plan and the study, so
Okay.
part of what we're funding is the studies necessarily to answer the questions that you're looking at.
Okay.
So feasibility will be a part of it, and they'll have feasibility in there. So we're giving them seed money to do the feasibility. Some of it will be looking at the investment. There's some preliminary stuff done, but it really needs to be more part of it. There's roles that they can do in classification of airports. I just learned a whole, I can't repeat it all today about the different levels of classification and the access to funding, but it's certainly being unutilized and certainly hasn't been kept up, and it hasn't been operating at its potential. And so this is an opportunity to really come in and look at that. It's talked about at the Council of Governments, talked about at the IRTPO, so the other ports and their identities are really knowing what we're doing on this. Don't have as active a role as the three of us, but certainly supportive of it, and conversations with one of the port commissioners of South Whidbey, and he's been very supportive of it and understands the economic development and the benefit to the community for this.
Okay. And so one of my clients actually had this airport in escrow for a short period of time, and I drilled him about this. And one of the things that I did learn that I found fascinating was we're one of the few counties in the country that don't have a truly functioning airport, which is, I mean, we should have an airport. But I also learned that with the FAA funding, they'll pick up a lot of the costs of the airport and maintenance going forward. But there's certain things that we have to have in place to qualify for that, which would be water and sewer. So will that be part of the plan to get water and sewer out there so we can qualify for that FAA funding?
They've already talked about it in the preliminary.
Okay.
They could bring it from Oak Harbor, or there is Penn Cove Water and Sewer District that's pretty close too. to them too. That certainly is a possibility. So that's part of the whole planning area, looking at it, because certainly if they bring in water and sewer, then they'll be able to have more density there. It limits them with being on septic and well. But that's certainly part of the preliminary, and it'll be more planned in longer-term plan in addressing those issues.
Okay. And one other thing, I don't know how much I can get into it, but there's talk of a private hospital going in down in that vicinity, which would also require water and sewer. So, I mean, this could be a great deal for everybody in our area. So this is something that I'll support. Thank you.
Councilor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted to give an example of one of the economic drivers that the airport provides is when we had it active previously, there was skydiving, that was out of there. And so it was a nice draw for people to come to our area, and then not only would they skydive and then go to our restaurants and our shops and such. And so that was just one example that came to mind when you were asking about that. And so I just thought I'd share that.
Thank you, Councilor Marshall. My interest in the airport is something that, well, one of them, but something that Mr. O'Born touched on, and that is the emergency management disaster preparedness piece. Because, when we get an earthquake, and we will, we have a runway, the Navy's runway is right on top of a whole tangle of fault lines. I haven't looked at the Eisenberg Airport, but OLF is as well. And so if our bridge goes out or the ferries aren't running, we need to be able to get supplies or evacuate or whatever we need to do. And we can't assume that the Navy is going to drop everything and be on board to help us, because they're probably going to be dealing with their own issues. And so that narrows it down to the OLF, which we may or may not be able to get access to, also Navy property. And so I think to us, being relatively isolated on an island with one bridge and a couple of ferries, I think that it only makes sense to have an additional point of egress and ingress if there's some kind of an emergency or disaster. So in addition to all of the various economic development, I think it makes a lot of sense for us to have access to an airport. And I think that Councilor Wiesner made a great point, said something along the lines of, not wanting it to close. It's a lot easier to keep an existing airport open than it is to try and, create and open one from scratch. So I think that the city definitely has a vested interest in having that available to our population. So, I support the $200,000 buy-in to have access to it. Don't want to be in the business of running an airport, for sure. The port can do that, but definitely interested in some of the local and state and federal funding options too, to take advantage of that. So thank you for the explanation.
All right, thank you for the input.
Appreciate it. Any further comments, questions? Okay, we will move on to development services, SEPA thresholds amendment, and our senior planner, Dennis Lefevre, will present. Dennis, is he on the line?
Yes.
Hi, Dennis.
I am here. Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Good afternoon, Council. I will be presenting this item this afternoon, and I will be sharing my screen as well. This is your second touch, actually, on what we are proposing to do with our SEPA thresholds. And as a brief refresher, since this was dealt with a couple of months ago, SEPA is the State Environmental Policy Act, which is pretty much essentially a tool that helps gauge the environmental impacts of a potential development, whether it be residential or commercial or industrial or what have you. The state administers a lot of categories, actually a couple of dozen categories, which create exemptions from the requirements of performing the SEPA checklist. Some of them are development projects, others can be legislative, and annexation is exempt. Other are procedural projects that are exempt from SEPA. One of the categories that has an exemption is considered minor new construction. This does include single-family, multifamily residential. It can include exemptions for agricultural structures, minor office, school, and recreational developments, as well as parking, landfill, excavations. Under this category, there are certain limits which are called thresholds, which are set by the Department of Ecology. In the minor new construction, there is if there's no SEPA checklist, then that would be considered an exemption. Thresholds in this minor new construction are considered flexible because it's really up to the jurisdiction to set their own limits as far as would be exemption or what would be required to perform the SEPA check and subsequent review. For Oak Harbor, our last time we really looked at these thresholds was back in August of 2004. So it's been almost 20 years since we've last looked at these thresholds. I might want to note here, as an outgrowth of our housing action plan, this was a recommendation that we take a thresholds and possibly increase our thresholds so that it does save some permitting time and cost for any development that might occur in the city of Oak Harbor. So we are still continuing to implement our housing action plan. And we are looking at increasing our thresholds. This table here shows the set thresholds for this category by Washington State. It shows in the second row here the existing thresholds for the city of Oak Harbor, and then the bottom row shows what we are proposing as far as thresholds for these different categories. Now, before I go too much further, we had a little curveball thrown at us last month where the state actually changed the rules for developing SEPA thresholds. Not necessarily in a bad way, but what they did was they created another category for single-family dwellings less than 1,500 square feet per unit. And they set 100 units as a threshold for that category. They also, in the same rule, established for multifamily residential, which is development, actually, when you think about it. And another rule that they required a community to engage in was increase to their thresholds, communication with the Washington Department of Transportation, especially if there's a state that bisects their community, like Oak Harbor. So we have actually engaged communications with WashDOT, and we have sent them all of our materials so that they can initiate their review. So with that said, this table would be difficult to read, I understand, but it's in your, it kind of gives you a comparison as to where we are with our existing thresholds and how we kind of compare to other neighborhood communities. So that we're pretty much low end with our existing thresholds. And with our proposed thresholds that we were looking at will bring us a little bit more consistent with some of the our neighboring jurisdictions. So what does the process entail? Well, your packet includes roughly 30 pages of findings that we were here to prepare that actually each one of our increases compared to each item in the SEPA checklist. So it was quite an effort. We were also required to identify where in our development regulations or state and federal laws which provide adequate environmental protection for our proposed increases. Another piece that we are required to look at is our cultural and historic resources and how the increase to our thresholds would not impact those elements of our community. We were also required to provide a 60-day comment window, which we have. As I mentioned, we are continuing our Washington Department of Transportation. So that information is in your packet. The findings are also in your packet if you wish to read through those. If you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call. So the next steps for this is we are going to take whatever time it needs to make that coordination with WashDOT and make sure that they have a full understanding of what we're proposing and also address any potential mitigation that they may be requiring. We will be preparing a draft ordinance. Next week, we'll be making our second presentation to the Planning Commission. We will be teeing it up for a public hearing before the Planning Commission in March, where we hope to get a recommendation to bring back to you at your April 18th meeting. Of course, it's all contingent upon how this coordination with WashDOT goes, but we'll see. Right now, we are hopefully going to be bringing it back to you for an ordinance amendment in April. So with concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dennis. This time I will turn to the council for questions, comments. Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Dennis, so the numbers we're coming up with, was there an attempt to justify numbers closer to the state maximums, or, I mean, how did we come up with the numbers?
Well, we had a number of discussions with staff, planning staff, and we felt that we wanted to kind of hit the middle of the road. Certainly with the single-family residential, the difference is with 9 units. Once you go over 9 units, that's a major subdivision. So that's usually a larger development procedure. It's more of a process, and there could be more environmental impacts, which we would want to maintain control over. Anything under 9 units is still a short plat, and that's an administrative review. So that's kind of where we settled on that. The same could be said for the multifamily structures, where we are proposing to go up to 20. We are actually in code now, there is no category for multifamily housing, so it's kind of a default to the single family 4 units. So we're actually increasing that 5-fold up to 20 unit structures. Other than that, I think the office and commercial structures, which are increasing from 4,000 to 12,000, is reasonable and still manageable. I think anything over 12,000 is planning staff has indicated, you know, we still want to maintain some type of environmental control of larger development. May occur over 12,000 square feet. So does that answer your question, Councilor?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and I appreciate that clear answer. I guess I'm just I'm a little confused, but I'm not, right? You know, we have a whole lot of regulations in place, you know, when dealing with development, you know, storm runoff, turbidity, you know, all the things, you know, in place, and you know, I mean, let's face it, SEPA's an extra step. It's more of a notification step, right? It's a nice questionnaire that you get to fill out that then goes out to several governmental agencies. There's a public posting requirement, and so I guess the one step I think that it adds that benefits the public is the fact that there's one more public comment period with a SEPA threshold document that you wouldn't have without SEPA. But you know, I'm just trying to look at, you know, I get where there's an advantage to the state and, you know, the EPA side of things, but what advantage is it to the city to maintain those SEPA thresholds that are more restrictive than what the state requires?
Well, I think just from the environmental standpoint, we heard last night a lot of discussion on the issues with the annexation and the maintaining a buffer area or the woods and the wildlife. SEPA, once it gets, you know, over a development over a certain level, will give us some kind of control to maybe mitigate some of those issues that the neighbors may have. I think it's still a valuable tool. We need to make sure that we continue to pay attention to our resources, our natural resource base here in the community. And I think this is one tool that we're able to do that. I think I think the collective knowledge and experience of our planning staff is being reflected in these levels as well. Ray Lindenberg was very instrumental in helping set these thresholds. Kat Kamak, who has had a lot of planning experience, still agrees that over certain size developments, we need to type of environmental quality check. And this is one way to do that.
All right, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Counselor Hoffmeyer.
I think I could support the middle of the road approach here. In general, no matter the topic, I really struggle when we are trying to go more restrictive than the state. With the acknowledgement that we already live in one of the most restrictive states with regards to a lot of this development and stuff. So I could support this at the middle of the road approach or anything up to the state requirement. But I think in this instance, I'm okay with deferring to the knowledge of staff on this one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other council comments, questions? Dennis, thank you. And please thank your coworkers and your peers for that collective knowledge put into it. I think that we have found a nice kind of a middle ground because we certainly don't want to be too restrictive, but we also are very aware that our unique location on an island requires some additional care and protection. So I think that this is a good kind of compromise / approach. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I will forward your comment. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on, still in development services, we have our master fee schedule update, land use fees and annexation, and to present, we have our development services director, David Kuhl.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Heisen, members of council. Today we're going to talk a little bit about land use fee changes. As you recall, back at the January 3rd meeting, we talked a little bit about possible fee changes. Council decided not to move forward with the fee increase based on the consumer price index for the Seattle area, which was 8.9%. That was the number that came out in December. The recommendation at that time was to go ahead and wait until the new CPI came out later in January. That rate did come out on January 12th as promised, and the new CPI for the Seattle area is 8.4%. So not a real substantial drop. So one possibility is at a future meeting you can come back with an annual fee change based on the cost of living of 8.4% for the Seattle area based on this newly released information. One possibility is to go ahead and create a range of 0 to 4%. This could be created by ordinance, and we could do this fairly quickly. What it would do is it would put a stop so that if a fee increase comes through and a CPI of over 4%, let's say it's 5.7 or 6.2 or whatever, 4% would be the maximum you would charge. If the rate went below 0, the minimum you would charge would be 0%. So if the rate came in at 2.3, then you'd charge 2.3. So this would give you a nice middle range to choose from, not extreme in either direction. Another option would be to go ahead and analyze this through a fee study. The fee study could be where we would hire an independent firm to come out, look at all of our fees, and give us a full understanding of what our costs of doing business are. They go through all of their wages that we pay, the benefits, the lights, the building, all that kind of information, and come up with an actual cost of doing business. The benefit of this would be knowing what your costs actually are. The estimate we have when Mr. Goldman and I sat down with the firm was between $30,000 and $50,000 based on a scope of work that we have not determined yet. The scope of work would include what kinds of permits we wanted to analyze. So land use fees include things like conditional use permits, subdivisions, rezones, site plans, that kind of thing. This would not include building permit fees at all. Building permit fees are done in the building code, and we're not talking about touching those at all. So we would come up with a scope of work and come back to you with a contract for somewhere in the range between 30 and 50, we believe. So the options are continue with the current code procedure and increase the rate 8.4%. Adopt the annual fee change based on the range between 0 and 4%, or hire an independent firm to review our costs and develop recommendations on land use fees. Now, unfortunately, I think this is the wrong presentation. I had other information in my presentation about annexations, so perhaps that's available and we can talk about that right now. We do have a request to look at our annexation fee at the same time we're analyzing our fees, and we could ask our consultant to do that as well if that's the direction we go. Currently, the annexation fee is $28.12 for one lot, and there's a $187 fee in addition to that per acre. So the way for an applicant to save money would be to get another participant next door to join them, and then the fee would go from about $2,800 to $1,400, so it would cut it in half. As you can see, you can do that several times over. Let's say you have 3 people join you, and then you have 4 people annexing. You cut your costs from $2,800 to $700. But unfortunately, people don't all want to annex at the same time. People have their own septic they've invested in. They like being in the country. They feel like that way, so they come in on a case-by-case basis. And so the city has determined, yes, we can annex one lot at a time. And it's just the reality of it is that people are required to pay the full $28.12 for each lot that they bring in. So the council is free to choose whatever fee you want. That's totally up to your discretion. And so we are open to whatever suggestions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cool. This time I will turn to the council for questions, comments, feedback. Don't all jump at once. Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Cool. So I have thoughts on all of that for you. You knew I would have, right? You wouldn't expect anything else.
I'd be disappointed if you didn't.
Yeah, thank you. So, as you know, I have an issue with the across the board mandatory adjustment. I just don't like the idea that we don't really have a choice. And so that's kind of why we're here, right? Because what our current ordinance says is we have to enact an 8.4% CPI across the board increase, because that's the way the ordinance currently is written. And so, just so we're getting to the heart of this, right? And it's not that I don't think that we have to cover our costs at all, right? It's just that technology changes, requirements changes, the amount of paperwork changes, how that paperwork is handled changes from year to year. I mean, it really does. And sometimes we're adding burden, and we're doing more work for the same amount of money. And even if we add the 8.4%, it's not going to cover it. And there's other places where we have efficiencies, right? We've added some new, tracking software for you guys, which may make some of these simpler permits easier to process. What I am concerned is when we start pricing permits to the point where people try to avoid to get them rather than get them, right? Because that takes away the protection. A lot of people don't realize, getting a minor permit for doing work in your home gives you the protection of having a third party come in and check out the work that's being performed, which is a true protection that you wouldn't get if you were doing unpermitted work. And so I'm afraid that, if we just keep adding 9%, 9%, 9%, even if the permits get simpler to handle or more complicated to handle, that we're going to just create this skewed deal, right? And so I appreciate the idea of a study, but then again, $30,000 to $50,000, right? Seems to kind of go backwards, right? If we have to spend $50,000 to spend money to try and save money on permits, but then we got to recoup the $50,000 by adding money to the cost of permits. So I guess, and option number two, I quite frankly hate the idea of again, putting a cap on ourselves. I think that's backing ourselves into a corner. And again, it's kind of an across-the-board thing, and I would think that if this body decided an 8% increase was what we needed to do, then I would hate to see that we have an ordinance that prevents us from doing that. I like the idea of annual review, okay? I will tell you that, because the reason we're where we're at, and the reason the ordinance was passed to require the annual increase was because there was several years that there was no annual review of these rates, and all of a sudden we realized that the permitting rates was nowhere near covering the cost of processing the permits, and then we had to do a big catch-up, and nobody likes that either, because that was a sudden shock. So I like the idea of annual review. Don't like the idea of necessarily boxing us into a corner and leaving your department possibly short of funds to actually do their job because we're only allowing certain parameters. Don't necessarily like the idea of an across the board as things change. Like the idea of a rate study, but don't like the idea of spending money on it. So I'm sure that didn't help you at all. But I guess where I'm coming from is with this new software tracking that we have, is there any way to track time spent when each person touches a file or touches a permit? Can we use it to get a better relative idea of how some of the efficiencies that we've put in place may give us opportunity on some of those smaller and easier permits to hold the line or maybe even result in a reduction? And at the same time, make sure that we're charging enough for some of the larger deals such as conditional use permits and stuff, which, may have a lot more paperwork, but maybe that paperwork's becoming more efficient, right? Maybe we're scanning it in, touching it once or twice rather than 8 or 9 or 10 times because of some of the things that are going on. Is there a way we can get there?
Yes, there is. We're gaining a lot of efficiencies with our new permitting system, and you've hit the nail on the head. We used to have a person who managed that whole process, and that was what she did. And we're finding that we're getting a lot of economies of scale just from efficiencies with our permitting system. People don't have to touch there's no paper anymore, so you don't have to touch it. You don't have to send it across the town to other departments. It's all electronic. And so, yes, we're getting more economies of scale from that. We are not currently tracking our hours in the system. It does have the capability, but we haven't taken it that far yet. We are still working through the bugs and making things work better for us all the time with the permitting system, and that is something we can certainly explore down the road.
Thank you, Councillor Wiesner. Councillor Hoffmeyer.
Not a fan of option 1 or 3 at all. I think there's some elements of option 2 that are palatable. Gosh, I think personally I'd rather see a 3% cap than a 4, but I also see what Councillor Wiesner is saying. So, if there was a way to build in the annual review element to option 2, to where I guess to where option 2 is what's going to happen if we don't address it, but that it should be reviewed each year, something along those lines possibly.
Thank you, Councillor Hoffmeyer. Any other council? Councillor Stuckey.
I'm a little interested in the part in the packet, and I understand you don't have the correct presentation about the annexing. So we have someone who's trying to get annexed into the city, probably one of the people we individually talked about recently, and that individual indicated that the annexation fee seemed high. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So in that annexation fee, where was it? $2,000, some change, and the 187 break. Thank you. What other fees are there really? I mean, if I have a home right outside of city limits, am I doing a survey and paying for that? What other fees am I paying on top of this? I mean, practically.
Yes, good question. In reality, when you annex to the city, you need to do a survey, so we know exactly what you want to annex. And it usually includes the roadway in front of your property. And normally you're annexing 2 or 3 properties at a time, so you're bringing in the entire road and all the properties all at once. And as I mentioned earlier, you get some economies of scale by having more people join you. But a survey, and I'm not sure exactly what a survey costs today, but it's several $1,000s, I assume. And so that adds to your cost, as well as the $2,812 plus $187 per acre. So one thing I've been working on with one particular applicant is I called an engineering company, and I've been working with them to draw a legal description just of the property and not require a legal description, a survey. So the survey is where it costs the money, and we would exempt the road from coming in that case at this time. We would still need to create unique things like easements in the county right-of-way so that sewer lines could be put in later. So it gets a little more complicated trying this, but it could knock some of the cost off the top up front in this situation.
Because I like the idea of someone trying to be annexed. It shouldn't cost an arm and a leg. I mean, it would be nice to get more people annexed so they can help and share the indebtedness of the city. Maybe a question for our finance director, but yearly, how much do we bring in on permit fees? I mean, average.
We had a,
I see.
I have it
He's
right
up
here
here.
in front of me.
Go ahead.
Let's
Awesome.
see here. So for 2021, we're not talking building permits, or do you want to talk building permits too? Because you said permit fees.
I'm sorry. So the permits that we have here that we're looking over, which I believe include, yes.
Yeah, the zone, all right, so we have
Yeah.
a zoning and subdivision fee, a plan check fee, and then like an other planning development fee. So for 2021, it was about 150,000. And in 2020, it was about looks like about 115,000. And in 2019, about another 115,000. I don't have the 2022 figures on this screen here though, but that was a 3-year trend from the closed years.
Thank you. I was just trying to conceptualize in my mind, worst case scenarios, you pay $50,000 for a study. How long is the return on investment? I mean, if you told me that we made $50,000 on permit fees, which I know that's not the case, I'd be like, well, it's a whole year's worth of fees just for the study. So that kind of helps me a little bit. Is it possible? You mentioned that this new software can track hours, correct? It's not being utilized.
It could.
Could we do either a nominal increase or no increase now, wait for a year to track that data, have a better idea, and make adjustments at that time?
That's certainly an option. We could start tracking even 1 or 2 types of cases to see what kind of analysis we could bring back to you with the type of cases and what the hours are that people typically spend on those cases, and then you'd have more information.
Because it would be nice to justify increases of how much time it's taking as opposed to just increasing it by a flat rate. I mean, certainly a percentage is easier by all means, but it'd also be nice to know, have a year of data of seeing how long each thing takes to help justify it. Wow, we didn't realize this was taking us 50 hours. I thought it was only taking us 30. Well, we got increased costs on that. Oh, this is saving us time. It would be nice to have more data as far as that. So maybe we do nothing, or if we do an increase, it's just as nominal as they come. That'd be my opinion at this time.
Thank you, Councilor Stuckey. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I, a little bit follow up on the annexation and the fees? Also, what comes later is when they connect to water and sewer, there's the system development charges that the new people, even though it's an existing home or if they build a home, if they're connecting, they're still subject to that system development. So from a public policy point of view, I think it's in our best interest to encourage annexation. And we've had a lot of annexation requests since I've been here in my 4 years, and and maybe 1 out of 5, I'm not ready to do a study. I probably shouldn't do that, but it's a small percentage, let's go that route, of people that actually had shown interest, that met with the council and shown interest, really follow through with that. And so is the cost one of the issues that's following through with that? Because we do have other benefits for them and bring them in. They share in our debt. There's other components of it. They pay system development fees. And so from our point of view, I think we want to encourage annexation. So fees don't necessarily have to be, you have the building fees, but you kind of try to balance with the actual cost and with the incentive and what's the best interest. So just another economic development we talked about here, but there's other costs that are involved and other benefits involved than just the cost themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stuckey. Councillor Evans.
So can you help me understand how we came up with these fees in the first place? I mean, are they based on time?
Well,
I mean, just as an example. Just as an example, the application for annexation, it's $2,812 plus $187 per acre. What is that fee covering?
Currently, the fee would cover staff time. It would cover any review time, such as staff downstairs sending out notices to the public and making sure that all the signs were posted and on the property, which is what the applicant's required to do. It goes through all the hearing notices we do. So producing that, getting it paid for, we pay for all that out of the budget that we have.
Out of that fee?
Well, the fee doesn't go directly to that, but, it comes from the general fund.
Right.
Technically speaking, that's where it comes from.
Okay. And if we're not tracking the hours, were these just estimates based on what we thought it would take to accomplish those?
I don't honestly know how they created the fees originally, so that's kind of where we are stuck. We have to just do a guesstimate of our hours, and if we were to come up with our own analysis of what the fee should be, that's certainly something we could take a crack at and come back with some information for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Any other council feedback? Personally, as loath as I am to spend money on a study, I think that it would behoove us to have a consultant come in and do a study and help us be able to answer the very question. I think that the city should always be able to provide an immediate and comprehensive answer to the question, why do you charge X amount? We should always be able to say, because this is exactly what it costs us, and and this is why. So I think that any change we make is, at the end of the day, is going to be fairly arbitrary, and I'm not comfortable with that. So it would be my preference to bite the bullet, commission the study so that we know exactly what our costs are, and we can then be able to answer the question, why do you charge what you charge? So I don't know what we would do in the meantime, just stay steady at the current rates while we wait for a study to be completed. If you think that we should make a change in the meantime, I don't know how long something like that would take. Do we know how long it would take to do a study? Like, are we talking weeks or months?
Probably a few months.
A few months? Okay.
We'd have to find the firm, do the contract with them. They could do their study. Maybe Mr. Goldman has an opinion. He just went through this process with the sewer connection charges. But it would...
Well, yeah, it would probably take a total of 6 months. We'd have to go out to RFP, select the firm, go through that process, and then bring it to council to award the bid, depending on the price, if it's over 30 or not. And then we'd provide information, and it would probably take about 6 months. It's usually the standard amount of time these kind of studies take.
Okay. In order to avoid just picking an arbitrary number, it'd be my preference to have the study done. Absolutely. Councillor Evans.
Would the study actually be able to tell us what our fees should be based on time if we don't know how much time it's taking? I mean, otherwise we're just spending 50 grand for them to, I mean, with the sewer plant and the system development charges, they base that on the debt that we have for the sewer plant and spreading that out and trying to recoup that money. But what are they going to base it on with this if we don't have the data to give them?
Well, we will build, David Cool, I'll work with David Cool to build the scope of services that we'd be looking for, and we will put that in the scope of services, and they may be able to provide some techniques to kind of measure how long things take just by observing, or maybe asking around or taking an average for, similar cities or whatnot. I'm not really sure what each individual proposer will suggest as a way to provide that information, but we will look at the different proposals and we'll look at their methodologies, and we can determine based on the methodologies they present which one makes the most sense, and we'll bring that up for approval, before we go ahead and move forward with the study.
Okay. Mr. Administrator?
Yeah, just going to add
Yeah,
here.
of course.
Yeah, to it, I think also the comparables would be helpful too. So I know with the system development charge, we looked at the comparables too, was a major component. So it would be both internal time and looking at external other costs and being comparable to other municipalities.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not looking to, necessarily suspend any rate increase that needs to take place. Again, we don't want to debilitate your department with that. I'm not opposed to, coming up with some sort of figure, even if it is the 8% figure. But what I want to prevent is this automatic thing every year from occurring, especially as we continue the efficiency moves. Quite frankly, I think that if I'm not mistaken, that the time tracking in your software, it's there for a reason. And quite frankly, there's a lot of municipalities I've dealt with when it comes to projects that they accept a deposit in a certain amount, and the permit fee is a deposit, and they actually charge time against that deposit. And so in other words, the fee that they're quoting you for something such as an annexation is an estimate. It's an upfront estimate fee. You pay that fee, that's your deposit. They track the time that it takes for your actual project, and I often get a check back in the mail at the end of a project because we didn't use up the time. It gives the applicant the incentive to submit the application right the first time, to make the project as clear and straightforward as possible. Let's face it, some of the issues we have, we've got, that it has to be calculated into your fees here, is we've got an independent engineer, right, that we're paying by the hour to look at some of these projects. And when we have a project come back to the table 7, 8, 9, 10 times, right, that project is more expensive for us to process than a project that's a one-off. Even if we take and spread that out, and we hire this cost analyst, and we spread that out over everybody, there's winners and losers there, right? The guy who submitted his plan sloppily 9 times in a row is a winner, and the guy who did a one-of and had his stuff together and came in and was a very simple project is a loser, right? Because he's supporting the cost of the average cost of doing that. So, if we need a consultant to figure out maybe how to revamp our fees to make it more commensurate, but I think we can do that. I think we can do that internally. I think that software that we have has the ability that each time somebody's touching that file, that they tag, that they touch that file, and we start looking at the hours, and I'm really keen on certain things being flat fee. Building permits, there's certain things that there's a canned amount of work that you have to do. But when we're looking at these things like these annexations and conditional use permits and stuff, some of those are very uncomplicated and the fee is too high, and some of them are way complicated and we're not charging near enough. So I guess I want to plant that seed. My conversation about this is not necessarily to not get you the funds you need to move forward. It's let's talk about a different way to do this, because just taking an arbitrary fee and adding money to it each and every year because our books say we're supposed to just isn't conducive to all the other things we're talking about as far as creating affordable housing and bringing developers to our community that the type of developers we want in our community, right? So, thank you.
Councillor Stuckey.
Man, those are some interesting thoughts. I gotta give you props on that. That was good. I didn't think of it that way, and now it's kind of coming to me. So obviously, we need to give some sort of clear-ish staff direction. Some clear-ish staff direction. I kind of like what Councilman Wiesner was referring to. I mean, I like the idea of, first of all, let's use our internal. I'm just talking for one person, so maybe we can riff or not. I like the idea of using this software with the time tracking. I like the idea of figuring out on average what each thing takes. I mean, if this was a private business, that's how I would do it. And I know this isn't private business, but I would take the average of how much time it's taking for each thing, figure out what the average hourly cost is to our department based on salaries and whatnot. And then, when he was talking about winners and losers, I mean, you could have a review fee or something, have a fee that's a low fee, and then for those folks that turn in the stuff, they're kind of sloppy, have a re-review fee to incentivize those to get right the first time. But right now, today, I am for, let's not touch the fees. Let's get a year of concrete data under our belt and then make a decision based on that time. I think it can be done internally. Won't be perfect, but to me, it avoids spending $30,000 to $50,000. That's just me.
Councillor Hoffmeyer.
Basically what the previous two counselors said. I'm not opposed to a survey, a long-term, but I don't support one at this point. I know that the results of that survey would say that we could and should charge much more than I would be willing to do. I think possibly what we could and should charge just are not maligned at all with the inflationary period of the last couple of years and the real need for growth that we have in town. So I too would like the rates to stay unchanged for the next year and know that this will need added to the docket to review in a year.
Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Might as well chime in as well. Yeah, I agree with the last comments that were made. I would prefer to take advantage of our current technology and see if we can't track some of the time for the next year. I'm not opposed to commissioning a rate study because I too like to know what our true costs are. I'd like to be able to explain to our public this is what our costs are. But I think having just an idea of how much time it takes us on each one will help us with that, and including the annexation fee. Give us an idea of how much time we spend on an annexation request, and if our fees are appropriate or not. So I too would like to just kind of take advantage of what we've got and see if we can't utilize our current technology, and then take a look at it again in a year. So thank you.
Councilmember Marshall. Councillor Wiesner.
Well, and to be fair to Mr. Cole, I mean, I think you did also come ask us a second question, a very specific question about annex, that is something that you've got in front of you, right? And you're looking for direction on how to deal with what's in front of you. And maybe we take, some of this and we merge it for now as a temporary patch for, I guess, give you some discretion, right? On what you think you need to do to, fill in this interim. What about if something like the annexation fee, where you look at that fee and you say, well, that fee may be exuberant for the particular project you have in front of you? What about if that, in your mind, is set as at this point as the maximum fee, and you have the discretion of billing for the process for at an hourly rate, right? In other words, $28.12 is the maximum we're going to charge you. Accept that as a deposit. We will charge you at the rate of $75 an hour. Set a fee for your department, and plus any additional fees, the postage and the other things you were talking about. I would think it would be appropriate to have some sort of a markup on those fees. That's how any other business would run it. And gives the applicant the choice. They know what the maximum's gonna be, and obviously, again, it gives them the incentive to, if it's a cleaner project, and again, I'm not trying to say this is a fix-all, but you get the faith at least I'm saying that I have in you, right? For the discretion. There's times, I'm sure, where you sit there and you look and say, oh my gosh, how can I charge that person that? Well, I think there needs to be discretion. When it comes to development, there are projects that will fit in a shoebox, and there are projects that you need a refrigerator box. And we're trying to, charge for those projects based upon a fixed fee. And I think we don't give you that discretion that we need to give you within your department to, make those rulings. And so that's just my thought there. I'd be okay with some sort of a hourly charge for an annexation, not to exceed a certain amount. And my concern would be obviously that the city is not subsidizing that annexation. We're getting our true cost back, but there's a ton of benefits to us on the backside, the increased tax revenue, the future hookups, and et cetera. So I certainly don't feel as though I need to make profit off of that annexation either. That all comes on the backside. That's my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Wiesner. Mr. Cool, you came to us for clarification, and now we just want you to revamp the whole way you do things. Just totally change the process, it's fine. Is it a reasonable request for us to ask your department to try and come up with some kind of an estimate in terms of real cost? That's been some mention of doing the sort of a survey internally and to start using the software to track our hours, in terms of annexations or whatever. I don't want to place an undue burden on your department, but is tracking the hours and coming up with a suggested number and then coming back to us with that number, is that something your department's capable and willing to do?
Councilman Heisen, yes, I think so. I've done that in other places I've worked. It wasn't as robust, I think, as a consultant would do, but it gives you an estimate of what you think things really should cost. With Councilman Wiesner's suggestion, he just wants us to take a crack at annexations for now, it sounds like. And then I'm not sure what the motion would be, because you have a code that says you're required to charge a certain CPI of 8.4. So I would need some direction not to charge that if that's what you want to do, or just to let it ride for a year and not raise the fees. And I don't know how you do that in an ordinance form, but any suggestions you have would be great.
Thank you. Councilor Evans.
Considering that we don't know what our costs are with each of these, I think it'd be hard to suspend. It'd be hard to reduce. I mean, I think we let it ride for a year, figure this out, and let the increase occur, and then get this dialed in. Just a thought.
Yeah, I would be comfortable with your department's best approximation of what we think that we should be charging. So is the general consensus to just kind of leave things as they are? Is that what you were suggesting? Or go with the 8.4 for now?
That's what you're suggesting, go with the 8.4? Yeah, just leave the code as is and get this figured out.
So
Otherwise, we're going to have to make a motion.
because the current code is based on the CPI.
Either an increase, suspend the increase. Which we want to get into that.
Right, because if we did not do the increase per the CPI, then that would require a revision of the code.
Sorry, when does the increase occur?
Typically, it's the first of the year.
Okay.
But we
So it's
are-
already occurred?
It hasn't occurred.
Okay.
So we're waiting until we had this
Oh, yes.
conversation. And then
Okay.
we have it scheduled for March to come back and address all of our fees in March. So that's on our agenda to do that. So we'll come back with numbers, actual numbers, and the fee increases and everything else that's adjusted.
We like numbers. Councilor Hoffmeyer?
Yeah, I still struggle with the 8.4% increase, being that we don't even know what it cost. So I would certainly favor suspending that for the year, or, I mean, we've let it ride to this point, so I don't know if we can continue to do that, but that's where I'm at on it.
Yeah, Mr. Oborn, because that's in our code, would that require a motion to suspend that for the year?
I don't think we're prepared to do one now, but
Right.
that would probably be a good way to do it, because it's your own code. And so giving us clear input of not implementing the code or suspending it
Okay.
or postponing the increase, because that's the problem we have. My suggestion would be just for now to just amend it to an annual review and not have a percentage in there, and just give you the discretion each year.
Yeah.
That would be my discretion, and then certainly staff could look at the CPI as an indicator here. It didn't sound like you wanted a range on there, but that appeared to be the consensus, and that's what I would come back, is just direct staff to go ahead and amend the code to just, instead of giving an amount in there recommended, or it's not even recommended, it just says you shall do this CPI, that it just an annual review, and council will determine how they want to do it. And then we can kind of work on the other stuff, because the fees are really, you got two things going on here. You got the code and you got the master fee schedule. So you don't have to amend the code to do the master fee. You can double, bring down the code. You can do whatever you want with that. Problem is, we got a code that tells us you shall every year raise it by the CPI in the master code. So just going to the annual review will allow council to look at it every year and make your own call on it, and that's what you're doing now.
I'm seeing some head nods in terms of that suggestion. So
Yeah.
does that provide you enough direction?
Works for me.
Okay. Councilor Stuckey?
I'm all for that, and I'm all for the flexibility. My only question is anything we're doing or discussing here holding up the application that is currently on your table for annexation? I don't want to be holding somebody up because we're,
The applicant has not paid the fee yet,
okay.
and he may be waiting for something to change. But that's not happening.
So the ball's in the applicant's court, it's not,
It is, yeah.
okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, staff feels like they have direction-ish? Okay.
We do, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, and moving on, item C, our 2023 Comprehensive Plan Amendment docket. And David Kuhl still has the floor.
Thank you, council. Today, we'd like to talk about the 23 Comprehensive Plan Amendment docket. This is something we do every year, as you know. This is codified in Oak Harbor Municipal Code 1815, where it says we can only do one update a year, and that's also by state law. These notices come out in October and November, then sponsored amendments are due by December 1st every year. These are private applications from private property owners are due by December 1st. The preliminary docket is held in January at the Planning Commission and then City Council in March. So you will see CAC come back here on March 7th. April through August, that's when we do our analysis and our discussions and our review of the comp plan and the docket. The state and SEPA notifications go out in September and October every year. The Planning Commission then deals with it in November, and City Council actions in December. So this is a yearly process. CAC did kind of an interesting use of a calendar here, where at the very top, he's gone in there and put January, February, and March. That's the docket review. Here in this blue area in the middle of the screen is where it's the project research and discussions. This area, August, September, are your SEPA notifications and your state notifications. And then the area in the end in green is October, November, December. That's when the process and hearings take place. This unique little arrow in the middle of it is where we start the process up for the next year. So that's kind of an interesting way to go about this. So items tracking in 2023. This is why we're here. The Housing Action Plan, as you know, we've been working on that for some time, and we'll be doing continued implementation of that. I am personally working on the multifamily tax exemption, and we have an RFP out currently, and that will be back on the 28th of February. We're looking for a firm to do the multifamily tax exemption for us. The joint planning urban growth area, that's been a popular topic of council for a long time. CAC and I are sitting down with the planning department in the county, and we meet with them routinely to talk about ways to do that kind of planning together. Currently, we're waiting for a urban growth analysis done by the county, and when they do their buildable lands analysis, it's going to tell us how much capacity they have in the county and how much capacity we have in the city. So as you remember back in our housing analysis, we found that we had less than 10 years of growth capacity from our own analysis that we did. And we think that the buildable lands analysis done at the county should tell us the same thing. And once that comes out, then that should give us the impetus for the county to move the growth boundary. But that happens in 2025. And so part of our big update that we're doing in the city and the county is 2025, and that's done every 10 years. So this is the big one that everybody is required to do. The last one was done in 2016. It was technically done in 2015, but it wasn't adopted until 2016. And so this is where we come back and analyze everything. That's why we've been approved already for some budget to do hiring a contractor to come in and help us. And that's what we'll be talking about over the next couple of years. We'll do it in 23 and 24 so that we're ready in 25 to adopt it. Other things we're doing is the transportation element, the active transportation plan. CAC is working on that with Alex Warner and Sabrina Combs. Alternative street connection plan, that's where, as an example of one that it could be proposed, is where the potential roundabout will go at Highway 20 near Swantown, figuring out those alternative street connections. That will go into our planning process. That way we have it in a plan before we start requiring something like that. Capital improvements plan, that's done annually, and so that is something you can expect every year. Land use element, we're also talking about changing some industrial categories in the zoning ordinance, particularly to update those to take away industrial park and industrial business park to just have flat industrial. We think flat across the board will work better for everybody, and it'll make the regulations easier to follow. Downtown Marina, scoping study. That's right out of your top 32 list that you had for quite some time. And we'll be scoping exactly how to go about that. And we think that there will be public participation as part of that. And so that'll be a big part of our 2025 update. And this year we have no private amendments proposed, so makes our job a little different. Back to the timeline, public hearing for the docket January 24th at the Planning Commission. City Council workshop today. City Council public hearing on March 7th. And the Planning Commission will debate it and talk about it through the summer. City Council will have a workshop in July and August. And the SEPA notifications and Department of Commerce notifications go out in the fall. Planning Commission will start up their public hearings October through November, and then you'll see it in December. So that's the game plan for the docket this year. And they're generally tied around comprehensive plan changes, but sometimes there's some zoning changes too. So we're available for any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Cool. Any council comments, questions regarding the comprehensive plan timeline? All right, seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing none, we will move on. Item D, our open space zoning addition to the land use matrix. And we have Senior Planner Ray Lindenberg presenting. Is Ray on the line?
I am here. Thank you.
Hi, Ray.
Thank you, Council. I'm just going to do a brief presentation here today. Hopefully, it will be pretty straightforward for you, although if you do have any questions or concerns, we'll have time at the end to discuss those. Essentially, what we have here is in 2021, we did a rather significant change to the code to remove the individual use lists from each zone district. And each zone district had a list of, 10, 15, 20 different uses that may have been consistent with each other, but may not have been. And so we wanted to clean that up a little bit. And the concept we used was to put everything into one land use matrix or zoning use matrix. And so that was created as part of that overall project. What we didn't realize while we were working on that is that we did leave one thing out, and that was the open space, the OS zone district from the matrix itself. So we're taking this opportunity to, number one, get that back in there and also make some minor changes that we had intended to do along with that during that project. And so what I have here today is a brief presentation, like I said. I'll just start sharing right now. That kind of gives you an overview of what it is we're going to do. So let me get that started here in just a moment. So like I said, what we're doing is making the changes that were inadvertently left off from those revisions that were done in October of 2021, and then including the intended changes to the text that we have there. And so what we're proposing to do with this particular code amendment is to clarify the function of the items that were transferred into OHMC 1920-1010, and that is the matrix section itself, and adding some additional text to 1920-835, which are the conditions that are governing the permitted uses and conditional uses within that OS zone district, and then adding that OS onto the matrix itself. And I'm going to bring up here really quick what we have as the pre-2021 OS zone, and that was included in your staff packet there, or your agenda packet. From my staff report. So it should be a little bit familiar for you, but I'm just going to go over it really briefly here. So in attachment 1, we have the, like I said, pre-2021 OS zone district. And you see the purpose and intent statement, and then you see the different principal permitted uses, accessory permitted uses, and conditional uses permitted in the zone. And one of the things that we went and did is we removed the distinction between principal and accessory permitted uses because it was becoming an issue for us that was open to interpretation based on who was reading it and things like that. We wanted to simplify, make things easier, more streamlined for applicants, the general public, staff, and everybody. So we just started using the permitted uses and the conditional uses, and then there are standard accessory uses that go with everything. And so this, like I said, is the previous zone district, the OS zone district. And how we looked at it from that standpoint was we included some of those things that were in the permitted uses into the matrix. And so when we included the matrix, we had all those uses in there. We just forgot to put the OS on the end there. And so what we will do is include the land use matrix attachment 2. This is the draft revision with the changes in the red text. And so again, this is 1920-1000. And this is the new section that we did in October of 2021. We have the accessory uses for all zone districts here. We have conditional uses, just kind of some text describing what it is those are. We have a list of prohibited uses in all districts. We have a discussion of the shoreline jurisdiction, and then we have the actual matrix itself. And if you see on the right-hand side there, we have OS in red, where we have conditional use as a campground. We have permitted as forest, and then adjusting this slightly to say wetland or other natural lands. We have a conditional use for a golf course. It's also conditional use in some other zone districts, and that's how we kind of kept that consistency in there. Keep scrolling down, we got a conditional use for a private park or clubhouse, and those are things that are defined in our definitions section of 1908. We have public and private schools, public parks scrolling across there is a permitted use, as it is in a couple of other zone districts. A conditional use for public utilities, conditional use for radio and broadcast towers, television broadcast towers. Again, consistent with the other zone districts and being a conditional use. Scrolling further down, we have transmission lines and other primary facilities. Utilities, again, a conditional use, typical. And then down at the bottom is the catch-all, the caveat for these zone districts. Uses as defined by the planning director to be similar to other permitted uses is permitted. And then uses defined by the planning director to be similar to other conditional uses is conditional. And we also put that into the PRE zone district, which is not right now in the city, but could be in the future. That is one of our land use categories, but we included that in there. There are a couple of different little changes to it too, to make everything consistent so that we make sure that we're not having any situations where we're having to do interpretations and, kind of mess with things a little bit that we don't want to. And so you'll see in attachment 3, the OS zone district revision. This is going back to, we had the original in attachment 1, the OS zone district. When you skip over to attachment 3, you'll see that those permitted and conditional uses are now gone, and we just have the density provisions and then conditions governing the permitted or conditional uses, where we added in some additional language that was found in the other portions of that original code, so that we make sure that we're covering all the bases that we had before. But we're doing it in a more efficient and more consistent manner. And so that is essentially the extent of the proposed changes there. We have in attachment 2 the proposed changes to the matrix on the right-hand side in the column there. And in attachment 3, we have some additional conditions governing those permitted and conditional uses. And I believe that is the extent of it. So if you do have any questions, here to discuss those with you today. We did talk to Planning Commission about this previously, and so we're just getting it kind of started off here. Hopefully not too controversial or anything. We would like to be able to kind of move this through and get things, kind of get those loopholes tied up so we don't have any issues with future applications and things like that.
Thank you, Ray. This time I will turn to council for comments, questions, feedback. Councilor Stuckey.
Seems pretty simple, but when folks mention ran by the Planning Commission, I'm trying to make it a habit to ask if they had any comments. Did the Planning Commission have any comments, or was it simple for them as well?
It was fairly simple for them. That is an excellent question. We did have a comment about including, let me see, I'll scroll back here really quickly. Including a distinction for the size of greenhouses and garages and shops. And that did not make it into the text that we sent to you because of the timing involved. But there was a distinction of those sorts of structures being less than 600 square feet being accessory uses in certain situations, whereas ones that were larger than that would be under a different category. Just to make a distinction between a quote-unquote home greenhouse or accessory structure versus something that might be used commercially.
It's an interesting thought. Thank you.
Yep.
Good question. Any other comments from council? All right, thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
Next up, I think, yep, you're still presenting. We have design regulations and guidelines update.
Yes, I am still here. I'm just getting my my screens all organized here really quickly. Apologize for the delay. Okay, so this is a discussion on our design regulations and guidelines document. Thank you again, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the City Council. What I'd like to do is kind of go over the same sort of process here, introduce what it is we're talking about, and kind of go from there with any sort of discussion that you might want to bring up. This is not a code amendment. This is kind of a situation where the regulations and guidelines are not attached to code, but we would adopt this by resolution if you choose to make the changes here. So I'll make my presentation and then we can kind of go from there. Okay, so what we have is our design regulations and guidelines, and gotta get that window open. Okay, there we go. So we had, again, this is a situation where we had a fairly recent change to this document. We made a change in 1953, Ordinance 1953, that made some changes to the residential zone districts themselves. And those changes allowed for smaller lot sizes to kind of move some of our subdivision review process from the situation where people will be going through our PRD process, which allowed review of exterior design of homes and some of those additional kind of exterior review items that you don't usually get with a standard subdivision. And so what we wanted to do is kind of capture some of those design criteria and make sure that we're still getting quality design when we're allowing for these smaller lots, and not having situations where we're getting kind of poorly designed or unattractive, low-quality design in the community, but at the same time not adding additional cost or stifling creativity. These design criteria are fairly soft in their wording. They're not saying you shall do this thing or you shall do that, or there is a set criteria for architectural style or anything like that. It's more kind of a carrot than a stick situation. And so we wanted to make that perfectly clear from the beginning. We're not trying to increase costs here. We're just trying to make sure that we have good quality design and attractive neighborhoods and places that are going to appreciate in value rather than starting to kind of fall off that cliff of depreciation and disrepair. And so again, because it's the mitigations that we had available to us through the PRD process are no longer available for some of these subdivisions that will be doing smaller lots, we want to make sure that we are going through and making some review decisions based on that. So one of the things that I did as staff a while back, and this is something that didn't really get out into the public too much because we were discussing it as staff, and then we started thinking, well, maybe we should just fold this into the DRG document instead, is I had created essentially a document that discussed some of the design concepts that you have when you're dealing with narrow lots in single-family residential areas. And when you have a much narrower house, you have a tendency, especially if you have a garage that's on the front, that garage starts to dominate the facade. And then as you drive down the street or walk down the street, all you see are garage doors and cars parked out front. And so we're trying to minimize that. And one of the ways that the code tries to minimize that is by allowing essentially for a bonus on your setback. The code says that your front yard setback can be 10 feet to any living space or a front porch, but it still has to be 20 feet to your garage door. And what that does is that makes it so that the living space or a front porch will project forward from the house in front of the garage area so that you won't see that wall of garage doors essentially as you go down the street. It kind of incentivizes the ability to move that living space forward. Now, in order to do that, you have to have kind of specialized design concept there. And what I did in this narrow lot development document was to show some of the potential designs that could be used there. The only problem we had with that is, we're using designs that I found online. So I didn't want to be suggesting that anybody go buy, certain plans from certain designers online or anything like that. So it was more of an example kind of situation. The other thing that it considers is the possibility of kind of turning houses around, if you will. So you have a rear-loaded garage off of a alleyway or parking area or something like that, or where you have a situation where the front porch is facing onto a common green or a green street, sidewalks, et cetera. You can see those in that document there. And so what we did is in the current document that we have, that's attachment 2, and I will briefly show you that. I don't want to get too far into it because it's many pages long and it's going to be difficult to kind of express to you the changes that we've made there. But in the existing document on attachment 1, you're going to see that we have it organized with these sections that are down the lower left-hand side. And we have something for site plan, something for car-oriented commercial, neighborhood context, multifamily residential design, and landscaping, and then variances. In our new code, our new design regulations and guidelines in attachment 2, you will see that that has changed slightly to go from site plan to just context, landscaping, then car-oriented commercial, and then residential design without the caveat that it's just for multifamily, because it includes everything now, and then variances. So what we felt was that this makes a little bit more sense in the way that it's organized. And so when you scroll through that document and get to that residential section there, you will see that we have a separate section now for multifamily. And it talks about buildings, and it talks about landscaping and people spaces for multifamily projects still. It talks about how cars are oriented essentially, where the garages are, where driveways exist, things like that. And then we get into a new section that's for single family. And it's organized in the same way. We have a single family statement here, we have a picture, and then we start talking about how the buildings are oriented. And it talks about how a particular architectural style is not required. Street facades need to display architectural interest, but it leaves it open as what that architectural interest is. We don't want to set an architectural style or say that you have to have X number of square feet of stone or a certain kind of siding material or things like that. We want the creativity to still be there and still have, that high quality concept, but without specific standards for it. Talks about number 2 there, the reduced front yard setbacks have been introduced to allow for that living space, like I was saying, to project the living space forward or the front porch forward so you don't have the wall of cars and garages. Under number 3, it talks about neighborhood context, views, windows, and entrances directed towards the street and not to other neighbors' houses or parking areas. Number 4, it says side elevations should consider window locations to avoid privacy concerns. We're allowing for down to 5-foot setbacks on both sides now. And so we're going to have houses that are 10 feet apart from each other, and we don't want people just to be able to look straight into their neighbors' windows. And so part of the design process for these subdivisions should be considering that how do your windows line up on houses that are next to each other? And then we go on to landscaping and people spaces. It talks about street trees that are planted every 25 feet. That's a fairly standard requirement, and it's just stated here as well, just so it's perfectly clear. We have commonly owned open spaces and stormwater facilities. Sometimes may be required even if you don't have a PRD, and so it addresses that. Then we talk about cars. Where parked automobiles shouldn't be the dominant visual feature of a neighborhood. Obviously, cars are always going to be there. I think that the transition to electric vehicles, as it happens over the next decades or decade, will make it so that cars are still going to be around. We're not going to be transitioning to something completely different. So this is something that we should be considering for our kind of near to medium term future. Exterior parking spaces on individual lots can be de-emphasized through creative design. Just again, considering how it might appear differently if you can move the cars into a different location. And additional parking may be provided on the street in the form of curbside parallel parking spaces, etc. So that essentially is the extent of the new portion of this document. We have the single family portion, but we've reorganized how the rest of it reads by reordering the order in which that information comes. So what I want to do is just present that to you today. If you'd like, we can have a discussion about it now. We can also just kind of give it to you from that standpoint and discuss in the future. But it is our goal essentially to get this moved through a process to a resolution and hopefully have this on the book, essentially, if you will, so that future subdivisions can be reviewed for their aesthetic qualities, at least to a certain extent, even if they're not a PRD subdivision. So that concludes my presentation. I'm open to questions, comments, etc.
Thank you, Ray. Any council comments, questions, concerns? Councilor Wiesner.
I just have a quick comment. Great job, Ray. Yeah, I'm glad you caught on to the fact that, by losing the PRD process or having not as many people have to follow the PRD process, right, to create the smaller lots, which was the intention of changing the minimum lot sizes, was for smaller developments to not have to go through the PRD process. We lost some of that protection, and I'm glad you guys caught on to that and included some of that protection for the city and in the DRG, and great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other council comments? Do you have your, oh, I didn't know if you were pointing. No worries. Yeah, thank you. This is a really well-done document. I appreciate the fact that there are drawings and example photos of exactly what you mean. So it's really clear, even if somebody isn't familiar with the language and the verbiage, they can look at the drawings and the photos for an example of what you're talking about. It's really well done.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further council feedback. Thank you, Ray. You're excused, and we will move on to our fire station presentation. Do we need to take a recess? Does anybody need a break? Yeah? Okay, sorry. Sorry, Chief.
I'm all ready.
False alarm, I know. We will take a 5-minute recess. We'll be back at 3:55. Thank you.
Multiple times. Yes, it does happen.
asking for a lot of money, rough digits.
When don't I ask for money? I didn't. Although Sandra did. Sandra did, me sort of.
It's in there.
I was kind of in there, but it zoomed right through.
Loophole.
Well, let's see if this does too.
That's funny. Okay, we are back from our recess and we will reconvene and turn it over to our Fire Chief, Ray Merrill, for the fire station architectural design discussion. Welcome, Chief. Impeccable timing. Maybe.
Okay. Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. Council. It seems like it was only 18 hours ago we saw each other. So, it seems like just yesterday. You may have heard we're going to build a fire station. The word's on the street that may happen. So I want to give you a little history. You've had a chance to look at the information that we've had. This is all going to, I hope, be a review for all of you. But to give you a little bit of history on this, back in 2016, we went out for an RFP, both for architectural services and feasibility study. And that was set up in two different phases. Phase one was the feasibility study, conceptual designs, potential costs, looking at what we could do with the fire station. Phase two was going to be the final design, getting the engineers involved, the structurals, the civils, the site work, all of that taken care of in phase two. And the intent of the RFP was written such that if you got the contract in phase one, was not a guarantee that you get the contract in phase two. It was written that way specifically. And because if we were not really satisfied with the company that we got to do the initial conceptual designs and the feasibility study, we didn't want to be locked in to have to use them again. And the way the contracts were written was that if we were happy with that company, we didn't have to go back out again and do a new RFP, thus costing us more money. So the intent was, if we like you, we're going to keep you. If we don't, we're going to boot you aside. Good way to go about it. And it worked. So, like it says, we could retain your services with that option if we were satisfied with the work. We picked Carletti. There was a whole vetting process, and Carletti's company was definitely most in line with our goals and where we wanted to get to and how we wanted to get there. Pete and his company have a very long history of working with fire departments in the Northwest. We have visited a lot of the departments that he has designed, and we were very happy with his work and the workmanship and the quality of the product that we saw from Carletti. One nice part is he's local. He's in Mount Vernon. So when it comes time for meetings, he's not driving from Seattle or Bremerton or Portland or somewhere else, which again brings the cost down overall for the process. And he's not too big of a firm. He's still a relatively small firm, so it makes for good communications with Pete and his company. And when it was all said and done, our scoring team picked Carletti out of our group as our number one choice. There we go. No? There. We know that Fair and Pierce was selected to do the feasibility study to begin with. Carletti came up with a conceptual design. We knew that was strictly conceptual to get a cost analysis of what we were going to look at for the size of the station and the property that we were going to set that on. And as you can see, it came out to $2,900,000 back in 2016. As we know, we reviewed some potential sites and how we came up with the site that we currently have today. And that's his conceptual design. You've seen this picture before. I've had some conversations with him. We're looking at ways to reduce the cost of that building already. We've gone back and we've redesigned the interior structure of it, the design features inside of the building. One big change that we're going to make is, if you notice in this picture, it's got vertically hung doors, which was a novel concept for fire departments. But we found out that those doors are about $45,000 a piece. Conventional roll-up doors are about $20,000 a piece. So being a slight frugal on money, you can bet that the vertically hung doors are going to go away and conventional roll-up doors are going to be in their place. See, there you go. Already looking for ways to cut the costs. And we are looking at ways how we can reduce the overall cost of that footprint. One way we're going to look at reducing cost as well as impact to the environment. In the conceptual design, if you notice on this design, there's this driveway in the turnaround going to the north for a potential building in years to come. That's all going to come out. We're going to get rid of all of that concrete and all of that extra material, again, reducing the cost of that facility. We're going to change the design of the parking lot and the parking lot out front, again, to reduce the amount of pervious surface that we have to deal with, again, to reduce the size of the discharge that we have to have for stormwater runoff. So we are looking at ways to reduce the cost of the facility. And conceptual design, we've gone back 4 or 5 times looking at different design features and what we can do to make the building most efficient, both in heating, air conditioning, service, feasibility, to make it a good working fire station. Because, you know, when you design a fire station, it's not for 5, 10, 15 years, it's for 70 years is the average lifespan of a fire department or fire station. And this is one of the conceptual designs. We are looking at ways, can we reduce it? Can we reduce the overall footprint? We're hoping this comes in around, and this is going to scare you, $700 a square foot to build a fire station. Kirkland built one for not too long ago, and their per square foot was $1,100 a square. 1 square foot, $1,100. I've looked at other fire stations, they've been in the neighborhood of $300 to $400 to $500 a square. Central Whidbey Station that they are building today, which, by the way, is a Carletti design, came out at $725 a square. So I think we're in the ballpark at $700. Where did my picture go, Tim? There we go. Okay. So we know that the gracious citizens of Oak Harbor did approve our bond and our levy in 2022. I did contact Carletti. We had a very long discussion about where we wanted to move forward, that we wanted to retain his services. And I did request from him, and I did receive from him a new scope of work, which you should have a copy of. There were 13 tasks within that scope of work. His architectural fees are $402,000, plus if there's any additional work, if required, at a time and materials basis, which is pretty consistent with processing today. So, oh, who is that bald-headed guy? Is that you? Wrong color shirt. Darn. So, Tim's brought up his Carletti's scope of work. You've had a chance to look at this, I hope, when it was in the packet. You can see what his scope of work involves and what we want to do and how we're going to get there. And when I talked with Pete last week, he's going to send me over a copy of his normal contract that he uses. I talked with Sandra yesterday. We can either use our own PSA or we can utilize Carletti's contract. Either one we're going to send over to Hillary for their review prior to bringing it back to council. But the scope of work, you've had a chance to review it. Have you any questions from the scope? We know when we first talked to Carletti back in 2016, it was about $325,000 for that project, and now we see it's $402,000. Bottom line, it's the price of doing business.
Thank you, Chief. I will turn to council for questions, comments. Councilor Stuckey.
Doing a little napkin math. How many square feet are we thinking this is going to be? 700 square foot?
7,100 to 7,300.
1 second.
So it should come out a little over 4.9 million.
That's pretty good.
Isn't that pretty good?
Well, I was doing some math with what the bond was, taking out the quint, taking out the property. I don't want to say you have some wiggle room, but it's
pretty darn good, isn't it?
I was getting ready to get fired. That's the end of my question. Thank you.
I've done my homework.
Well done.
Thank you.
Councilor Hoffmeyer.
So always got the puns over here, huh? No, pretty impressed by the price there, actually. I expected it maybe a little more. So just whatever you're doing, keep putting the screws to people, I guess. Thank you.
We're going to make it happen. I've told you before, I am frugal. I'm not cheap, but I am frugal.
Appreciate it.
Any other comments, questions? Yeah, I was doing some math. In fact, when you were talking, when I showed Councilor Stuckey my screen, Tukwila just built a brand new fire station, and it's really attractive. And I just looked up how much it cost in the square footage, and it was almost $1,100 a square foot.
Yeah.
And then there's another relatively new one that's like $933 a square foot.
Yep.
So I think that
And I will say, the
You're in the
building that I
ballpark.
saw at Kirkland, it is a gorgeous station. I mean, they really did it very nicely, but they have a very large tax base to draw from
True.
at $1,100 a square foot.
Yeah, there is that. Okay, any?
Mr. Wiesner, no questions?
No questions?
Wow.
He's eating your chocolate.
He is.
Ray, this is the finance director. Don't forget to mention that the one at Kirkland has a nice piece of public art out front.
Yes.
I see potential.
Yes.
I see potential.
So this is going to come back on the March 21st meeting for approval. And then we can get the contract locked up with Carletti and start to move forward.
Okay, perfect. And next up, we have your staffing plan. So we'll let you keep the floor and
Thank
tell us
you.
about the staffing plan.
So we've been asked what our potential staffing plan is going to be, to get an idea how we're going to fill that station, when we're going to hire folks, and what our overall plan is. So we're going to take a look at 2023 and beyond. As you know, our current operations, when we take a look at what our current budgets are for 2023 and 2024, you can see what our suppression salaries are. You can see what the benefits line up at. This is for our career staff only. This does not include paid on call at this point. You can see what the overtime cost is going to be between 23 and 24. So our suppression wages is $1.3 million for staffing with our current staffing levels as they exist. Our paid on call comes out about $482,000 for 2023. We look at what our benefits are, what we pay for our paid on call benefits, and then the overtime that we do allow for our paid on call, because they do incur some overtime occasionally. Theirs comes out to $669,000 a year for 33 to 36 paid on call firefighters. So as an example, 9 career staff is 1.3, 33 paid on call is 669,000. We have really relied and depended on our paid on call for years, and they have been an extremely cost-efficient way to do business. As you know, there's myself, Deputy Chief Buxton, the training captain, Captain Anderson. I want to take a look at the right-hand side. I'm curious how we come up with 2,080 hours a year. I think we work just a tad more than that, but this is what we're supposed to work. Our captains work 2,728 hours a year. They're on a modified Detroit schedule, where they work 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, 96 off, and they get 8 Kelly days a year, which is a day off, so that they keep their hours below an X number of hours in a 28-day cycle. How did it become known as a Kelly Day? Kelly was a fire chief in Chicago, and the way he kept his costs down is they created Kelly's Day Off. So that's how Kelly Days arrived way back in the late 1800s. Our lieutenants work 4 on and 4 off. You can see their hourlies, or the amount of hours they put in a year. Same way with our 4 career firefighters. They work 4 on, 4 off, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And our paid on call work 12-hour shifts. There's 1 on day shift, and there's 4 on night shift, 7 to 7 and 7 to 7. And you can see the amount of hours that are put in. 21,900 hours is the amount of time it takes to cover the D shift for 365 days out of the year. Yes?
Is the 2,080 because your salary, you guys are salary at that level and everyone else is hourly? It's got to be.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, wow, everyone's working more than you. You're just kicking your feet up. But
Well-
we know that's not the case. So
Ours is figured on a 40-hour work week, and I'm told that's what I'm supposed to work. But, I think I was here until almost 10 o'clock last night, and Monday nights I'm usually at the station until 10 o'clock at night. But you'll never hear a complaint here. Is that correct? You know. And our D shift is 21,900 hours, is the amount of hours that the entire group puts in to cover 24-hour a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year to fill those shifts. And right now, it's shared by 33 of our paid on-call. And that 33 number stays pretty consistent. Sometimes we drop down as low as 30, sometimes we're up as high as 36. But the numbers will remain the same. So you can see what our current staffing level is. A shift, there's a lieutenant, 2 firefighter EMTs. B shift, there's a lieutenant, 2 firefighter EMTs. And you can see E, F, and G shifts. That's our captains that work that modified Detroit schedule. And then again, you can see our 5 paid on-call positions. To give you an idea what the benefits are for both the career staff and the paid on-call, of course, we've got a competitive salary for our career staff. There's longevity and education incentives built in to the contract. They earn anywhere from 29 to 45 or 40 hours of vacation per month because of the shifting they work, the 12-hour and the 24-hour shifts. Our paid on call, their median wage is $22 an hour. We know that our career staff will earn 8 to 12 hours of sick leave per month. There is compassionate leave built into the contract. Our paid on call do earn sick leave under the Washington Sick Leave Act, 1 hour for every 40 hours of work. And then every year, if they've accumulated more than 40 hours, they drop back to 40 to start the year over again. Our firefighters do have a left to retirement program. Our paid on call, they're part of the Board for Volunteer Firefighters. The city pays the premiums into the Board for Volunteer Firefighter, and after you've been there for 25 years, you get a $300 a month retirement benefit from the Board of Volunteer Firefighters. And we can also see that if our firefighters work more than 70 hours in a month for 5 months, they move out of Board for Volunteer Firefighters and they move into PERS and into Labor and Industries. You can stay in there for 2 years. We do a look back every year. Once you're in the program, you're there for 2 years. Even if your hours drop below 70 hours, you're still in PERS. After that 2-year period, if you've had less than 70 hours for a 5-month period in a year, you can go back to Board for Volunteer Firefighter. And that has happened because of people's working conditions. Of course, we do have medical, dental, and vision, 100% for our firefighters, 80% for the dependents. There's no medical or dental vision unless they're qualified because they've put in more than an average of 30 hours a week in 1 year, and then they are eligible for insurance for themselves, not for their spouse, the dependents, anybody else in the family, just for themselves. Currently, we have 4 of our folks that do take advantage of this program. Life insurance, $25,000 policy, at $10,000 on dependents. Life insurance on our paid on calls is a $25,000. Triple indemnity, $25,000 and $25,000. So it compounds depending if you die naturally, it's $25,000. If you die in an auto accident or a traumatic injury, it's another $25,000. And if you were wearing your seatbelt and died in a car accident, now it's $75,000. We know that our firefighter EMTs is pretty much a guaranteed, predictable schedule most of the time. And of course, our paid on call, they're unscheduled. They sign them a month in advance, and they can change shifts any way that they so desire during that month's period of time. So that's how our benefits are laid out for our career and our paid on call. And our paid on call don't start earning overtime until they get 53 hours in a 7-day work period. So we're very cognizant about keeping them below 53 hours during that work week. Mr. Stuckey, you look perplexed there.
How, I mean, obviously, you've been doing it. Isn't anything over 40 hours overtime?
Not because they're under what's called the FLSA 7K exemption for fire and police.
Okay.
Under 7K, on a 7-day work period, you can work 53 hours without having to pay overtime. You can do it on a 7-day, a 14-day, 21-day, or 28-day cycle, and your hours adjust accordingly before you have to accumulate overtime.
Okay,
So
thank you.
that's a requirement or an exemption under 7K
For
for
firefighters.
firefighters.
Not,
Because-
not last responders, though.
No, not the last person, just the first one.
I was just thinking there.
I got it there. So we looked at how we're going to forecast our levy funding, how we came up to that $1.9 million that we took to the public. And we anticipated what our fees and our costs were going to be over the next 5 years to come up to that $1.9 million. Mr. Goldman and I spent some time talking back and forth about how we're going to fund this. And we know the money is going to be dedicated to fire service. That's the intent of that $1.9 million plus the 1% increase every year. We know that in April and October, we get to pay our taxes. And we know in May and November, those taxes are distributed out to the city. And we know that this money, this $1.9 million, is going to be used for salaries, operational expenses, repayment of the engine loan, investment in the engine, which is a novel idea. We're going to put money aside in advance of having to buy an engine in a few years, so the money's already sitting in a pot there that we can buy a new engine. We haven't been able to do that over the last 33 years, 34 years, but we're going to do that now. We also looked at if there was a need, and the way the bond and the ballot measure was written, if there was a need because of an unforeseen event in the construction of the station or in the quint, we did have some money that we could use out of the levy the first 1 or 2 years because we're not hiring very much staff in the first 1 or 2 years. But as we've seen already, so far we've been fortunate. The quint's come under budget and the engine has come in under budget. So in 2023, I intend to hire 2 additional career firefighters. We'd like to put them on May 1st, and we look at a cost of about $220,000. That's a high cost because that is for the entire year, and we're really only going to have them there for 7 months. In 2024 and 2025, in 2024, one of our current lieutenant's positions is being funded by ARPA. That funding goes away, so now our levy funding will be paying that lieutenant's position at the end of 2024. In 2025, we're going to hire 1 new lieutenant position for $145,000 and 6 new career firefighters at $110,000. Station construction is going to determine when we hire that lieutenant, that additional lieutenant, and the additional 6 firefighters. So we know that our staffing total is $1.17 million. The engine purchase is $85,000. The money we're putting aside each year is going to be $85,000. Operation expenses about $140,000. And this was an estimate going on what our current building is and how much it costs to run our current station. We know it's probably going to be considerably lower, but we wanted to make sure we had enough money to cover what we needed to do. So our annual operating expenses is about $310,000, as well as when we hire all of our new career staff in 2025, we're looking at about $42,000 to provide uniforms and bunker gear. When we buy bunker gear, we don't buy 1 set, we have to buy 2 sets now. And as we know, bunker gear, the price has gone up. Pants and coat is in the neighborhood of $3,000 today. It used to be $1,500. It used to be $500. So it has gone up exponentially. So our total annual expenses starting in 2025, we're anticipating to be $1,522,000. So we're going to be hiring 2 career staff this year, getting them on the payroll. They are designed to fill positions and to cover cover vacancies for vacations. So we know it's going to take about 6 to 8 months for the prep work to start construction after we get a signed agreement with Carletti, which you'll see next month. And we've talked anywhere from 12 to 16 months from the time we start that project until it's done. If everything goes favorably, we should see 12 months. If it doesn't go quite so well, we're anticipating 16 months. And again, this is going to determine our hiring process moving into 2025. We are going to hire the 2 in 2023 to take care of some vacancy coverage positions, and we've got money set aside for future needs if we need to utilize it. And so again, this is our current staffing level. In 2023, we're going to hire 2 more firefighters. Now, of course, you can tell this is Angela's work on all of this PowerPoint stuff. We may look at the end of 2024 of hiring the 3rd lieutenant and putting Station 81 on 24-hour shifts at the end of 2024 in preparation of going full shift in 2025. And what it's going to look like in 2025 is there'll be a captain, a lieutenant, this one was blank, wasn't it? So in the A and the B and the C shift, we're going to have a captain, a lieutenant, and 4 firefighters. So you'll have a captain and 2 firefighters at Station 81. You'll have a lieutenant, 2 firefighters at Station 82, and those 5 paid-on-call positions will be able to be moved around the department if there's a staffing shortage anywhere between Station 81 and Station 2. Our commitment to the community was there would be a minimum of 6 firefighters on shift at any given time. So by having the additional 5 paid-on-call positions, we can augment as we need to fill those positions. They're not filling a career position, they are filling a dedicated paid-on-call position. And this is just what our staffing is going to look like. And as I've said before, we run considerably lean when you look at staffing levels, when you look at what our comparables department have at 1.2 firefighters per 1,000 population. Even with doing all of this, we're going to have a 0.85 career firefighter per 100,000. Again, we are on the very low side of all of our comparables. So again, we want to have 6 to 8 people on suppression at any given time between the 2 stations. We know that our annual leave, and by going on shift work, is at least 144 days a year minimum. We're going to be missing 1 person just because of Kelly days and 24-hour shifts. 144 days, we've already lost 1. When we start adding in vacation time, I'm estimating that 300 days a year, we're going to be missing 1 person at least. And we're going to look to go to the 24-hour shifts. We're still determining what shift we're going to go to. As I've had a conversation with the union, I said, I don't care. I don't care if you guys work 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, 96 off. If you work 24 on, 48 off. If you want to work 48 on, 96 off. I don't care. I want 6 people here every day, however we can make that work. And the union's very amicable to those discussions. So we're going to sit down and discuss what shift they'd really like to go to. And of course, we're going to continue our D-shift program because it's an effective way to continually staff the stations. And at that point, I'll take any questions. And I did really good for time.
All right, thank you, Chief. At this point, I will turn to council, and I see Councilmember Hoffmeyer has his hand up.
I like it. I like it a lot. Your staff, their union, everybody's support to this point, and continued support to the community is pretty amazing. But it is pretty cool to see all this coming together, and maybe we'll get to hang out with you again at a training burn coming up here or something.
Well, we've got 2 of them coming up real soon. One right behind us, and one probably in September. There seems to be a house over on 1250 Southwest Swantown that needs to go away.
Thought you were going to read off my address for a minute. Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome. Our pleasure.
Counselor Stuckey.
Two questions. One, in getting people to fill these positions, whenever you have openings, do you have a lot of good quality applicants, or do you think it's going to be a struggle to find good quality people to fill these positions?
Oh, no, that's a really good question. And the two positions I've got coming up now, I'm going to bet that I have 26 people apply for those two positions, because every one of my paid on call is eligible to apply for those positions. It's probably going to be an in-house advertising. We'd like to keep it internally right now. Sometimes it gets out to the other world and we get applicants from somewhere else. When we get ready to hire in 2025, we're going to utilize National Testing Network. And the intent with them is we let them know 6 months in advance that we're going to be creating positions. They make the notices, get the notices out, and then we get an eligibility list that we can draw off of. We have seen eligibility lists of 50 people for one position. So I don't anticipate any problems hiring some folks.
And then what about backfilling those paid on call? Is it also fairly simple to fill those, or is that a little more of a struggle?
No. This last time we went out in November of last year, we had 14 people apply, and 8 made it through the testing, and then for various reasons, some have dropped out, and we currently have 3 in the current academy now.
Oh, nice to hear. And finally, for that lieutenant position, is there a chance of that being internal, or are you for sure going to seek outside?
Sure.
Okay.
How's that for a
Appreciate
very
it.
undefinite answer for you?
Appreciate it.
That way I left that answer wide open. I could do either one.
Any other council comments, questions? Counselor Hoffmeyer.
Real quick, I know Chief's not one to toot his own horn. You know, as we went through this whole process, you know, there were quite a few other other fire departments that I had the chance to speak with, and I think your reputation and your department's reputation is probably why you're able to hire people so easily. I don't know that there's other fire departments that have had that success, so keep it up.
Well, we're going to do what we have to do to make it work. That we are.
This is a really incredible opportunity for anybody who is interested in the fire service or dreamed of becoming a firefighter, because paid full-time career firefighting positions are like unicorns. They are so rarely offered, and for us to have several coming up in the future is almost unheard of. So I strongly encourage anyone in our community that has any interest whatsoever to get involved in the Paid On Call program. We will pay you to become certified. We'll train you to be an EMT. And so all of the training and everything is covered, and then you can do the Paid On Call, and then that will get your foot in the door for future career opportunities. I don't remember, how long is the academy, the Paid On Call?
It lasts about 4.5 months.
4.5 months?
Yeah, and that's meeting on Monday nights, Wednesdays, and half days to 3/4 days on Saturdays.
Yeah, it's really an incredible opportunity, and there's going to be plenty of positions available to help. So really exciting stuff, Chief.
Many years to get here, and it's well worth it.
Yeah, you've been very patient. Any further comments, questions? All right, thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Moving on, we've got our city administrator's report, and our city administrator, Blaine Oborn, will present.
Yes, good afternoon, council. It's my opportunity to be the opener and the closer today, so we'll hopefully get this closing done. So I appreciate the opportunity to provide the monthly report and the help of city staff in providing information to the council. And I'll just do, like I usually do, just a quick highlight of some of the areas in here that I want to focus on. Under the administration leadership, we're preparing for the department director's retreat scheduled for February 27th. And then also on legislative outreach, great partnership with 3 council members and the mayor there. Great lobbying effort with our representatives. And as kind of was discussed yesterday, we really appreciate the support of our Representative Paul, Representative Shaver, and Senator Mazzal. They were all able to meet with us at least twice in more of a formal and then informal environment. So came up with some great ideas and some additional asks there. So I appreciate their effort in trying to help us out with things that we want to lobby for the Association of Washington City, and then also some special funding opportunities that are coming up. So I appreciate their efforts in supporting us. Moving on to other items, just under Public Works, certainly the purple street lights, LED lights has been kind of an issue. So notation in there that they're being replaced by the vendor, and that's good news there. And probably the last item to just cover there, we talked about it a little earlier, but we're always excited when we get additional grant funding there, and under the Safety Action Plan, our Safe Streets grant, we were able to be part of the RTPO, the Island Regional Transportation Organization, and awarded $403,200 there. So great effort there in the region for applying for that funding, and we appreciate the support from Senator Cantwell and the Congress for approving that funding for us. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Oborn. This time I'll turn to the council for any comments, questions, feedback. All right. Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, last up is city council questions, comments. Does anybody have anything for the good of the order? Anything you'd like to see on an upcoming agenda? Burning questions, bright ideas? Councilor Marshall.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. I've been asked why we're no longer live on Channel 10. Does anybody know why we're not broadcasting live on 10 during our meetings?
Essentially, when the other computer got taken off the network, now my phone was spinning on me. Basically, you had to get a new software system, and it's not communicating from live back to Channel 10 or something.
Gotcha.
So even though it's set up, it's just not doing it. So I've talked to Jim Riley, he's the one that originally set it all up. I'm just trying to see when he's available to come in and see what's going on. We don't know if it's an aspect ratio issue that's not going back, because it says that it's going there, but it's not. So essentially, it's just kind of one of those things. I don't know how to fix it. I don't want to send it back at, I think it's $150 an hour for them to try to fix it. So it's kind of one of those, what do you weigh it as we get videos up? Hopefully, right, we can fix it.
Right. Okay.
They're
All right.
posted after the fact, right? Just not live on Channel 10?
Correct. So it'll be up, the videos come up essentially, they get done, as soon as they're done rendering, they're put over there, so around midnight or 1 o'clock before I go to bed, usually I'll fire them over, they'll put them in the playlist and play out.
Yes.
So within 24 hours.
Yeah. And I don't think we used to do it live, and so when COVID, we added it, and then we, like you said, when we did some system upgraded, we were able to continue it. So, but during COVID, I think we added it. We didn't used to do it live.
It actually happened by accident that we found out we could go live on Channel 10. It was just somehow, some way, when we sent it back, because they did a bad update on us, we had to send Channel 10 back. When we got it back, I actually hooked it up wrong, and that's how we found out we could go live on Channel 10. So, well, otherwise than that, because they told us through the system we had that it couldn't be done. So it was actually by mistake that we found out, oh, we could go live on Channel 10 that way. So it was just kind of those happy accidents that we had happen, but that's just where we're at right now, just technical difficulties.
Yeah. So if we can get the technical difficulties taken care of, then we'll try to go back live on Channel 10. But certainly we continue to go live on YouTube, so that certainly is an option there. But we are, in the name of transparency and communication, I think we want to offer as much opportunities for people have to watch. And so unfortunately, we're unable to continue that, but we'll certainly work to bringing it back.
Just for reference, Comcast won't give us any numbers on how many people are watching Channel 10, even live or just right now it's playing out. They release the numbers we've asked for. With YouTube and Facebook, we have the algorithms to know exactly how many people are watching, when they're watching,
what part of the video they're watching. So like last night, it was completely dead until the sculpture came up. In which case we had about 30 people tuned in live across both sides watching it. And then as soon as it was done, people turned back off. So it's kind of one of those things of where do we reach the people? I know previously when Channel 10 originally broke, the hard drive died on it. We didn't even know because it was in the summertime. For almost 3 weeks that it was dead. Not a single public resident contacted us because we had no meetings or nothing to put on there. So we didn't really know until it was dead, and then it was, do we spend the result $3,000 or $4,000 to fix it or not? And that became kind of let's wait and see. And it was almost a month and a half, 2 months before a citizen even brought it up that it wasn't even there.
Wow.
So that's kind of also the factor of we want to push the digital stuff because that's what people are.
Okay, appreciate it. And then the other question I had is the Woodby Playhouse performance the only thing going on in town, or is the reader board broken down at Beaksville Park? Because that's the only thing I see up there right now. And I'm not directing that to you. I'm more looking at Blaine.
That would be behind me, communication IT manager. Sabrina, Holmes, are you be able to come on and comment on the poster?
Yeah, so it was down, so we're going through and updating those with the items that we're getting. We had some that were backlogged and had already occurred, so we're just getting back on track with the ones that we're receiving. And we'll get the standard messaging we had up as well. Unfortunately, we kind of got out of cycle because of the system being down. There was an upgrade that was required by the vendor, and we were waiting for the part from them, so it was delayed several weeks while we waited for that. And that just got fixed, I want to say, last week, so we've just been in catch-up mode with getting that taken care of.
Thank you.
Councillor Stuckey.
My mom has been asking about weekly when we're going to be on Channel 10. Did she contact you?
Yes. Contact me weekly.
Okay, that's all I have.
Sabrina, do we still have you on?
Yes.
To kind of piggyback off Eric's comment, I've received a number of comments from the public about the user friendliness or lack thereof on the city's website in terms of watching council meetings. If you go to the calendar and then the current council meeting, there's no way to just look at the agenda without downloading the entire agenda packet. And sometimes people just want to see what's on the agenda. So if there's some way we could include just a PDF, a link to just the agenda, or make that viewable, that would be really helpful without having to download, all 300 to 900 pages. And also, if you didn't already know that you could watch live on YouTube, there's no indication that that's a thing. And so if someone were to go to that calendar item, see the agenda, having a clickable link or a button or something, say, hey, this council meeting that you're interested is streaming live right now over on YouTube, that would also be helpful. Those are two of the suggestions that I received recently. So I'm not sure how much you can do with that, but I promise to pass that along.
I appreciate those comments. We are sitting down with the vendor. I believe it's next week to talk through some of the enhancements we want to add that are additional features. So that is one of the items. The other thing we're going to talk about is newsletter features and things like that so that we can enhance that for the public. So just rolling in the next phases of the tools.
Perfect. Look forward to hearing an update. Thank you.
Sure thing.
All right, council, anything else? All right, seeing no further business,